next talk. So the next talk is by Marc Denecker from the KU Leuven, who will talk about knowledge representation and reasoning. Marc?
Okay.
You only have 10 minutes, unfortunately.
I have 10 minutes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so can you see my slides here?
Yes.
Yes, I see them.
All right. So I submitted a position paper about essentially most of the work of the past decades. And I don't care to read it, but there are two basic independent scientific ideas in it. The first, it starts with the declarative logic underlying logic programming, and then goes to contributions of logic programming from a perspective of knowledge representation. And the second is the idea of the knowledge-based paradigm. I take the old-fashioned view of a declarative theory as a representation of knowledge. So that's not a program, and it's not a problem description. But the hope is that knowledge can be used for solving a range of problems, for which you then need multiple forms of inference. And so we are trying to build knowledge-based systems for that. So these are the two ideas in this talk. I'll start with the first one, which is, in a sense, perhaps most related to this happening here. So we've celebrated 50 years of Prolog, but we know that there are still lingering problems of logic programming at its foundations. For example, we are still not very good at explaining negation as failure. From my point of view, I have always seen this match between logic programs, like, for example, the member program, and inductive definitions in mathematics. Here, for example, the definition of terms in logic. And I've always believed that this resemblance was not coincidental, but essential. So for me, this really dates from the time I was doing my PhD. A logic programming has always been a definition of all predicates plus an axiom of the universe. I've written a number of papers about this the past 25 years. I think it's fair to say that I haven't had too much success with this. While I really think that it's still a good idea, and so I will try here in this small time that I get here to set a few good ideas for this. So, in the first place, definitions are, of course, an informal concept, but it's a very common form of knowledge. It's used in formal science and in mathematics. And that means that there must be a lot of instances of definitions which are natural, precise, and expressive. So if you want to build, or if you want to propose an informal semantics for a logic, then definitions would be an excellent candidate. Definitions are already in the mind of logic programmers. That's my impression. If I listen to programmers, they say things like the predicate P is defined in the file such or so, or the definition goes from line 240 to 255. And it seems to suggest to me that subconsciously programmers already think of programs as definitions. And so why not set the obvious step to view logic programming officially as a logic of definitions? Definitions also shed really bright light on the issue of negation as failure. It's believed now for 50 years that negation as failure cannot be classical negation. But why is that? It's because Horn logic theories do not entail falsity of atoms. So if you look at the member program and you look at the query whether 0 is a member of the list 1, 2, 3, Prolog will answer No, but unfortunately, Horn theory does not semantically entail that 0 is not a member of 1, 2, 3. And so, in the query, not member 0, 1, 2, 3, we cannot interpret the prolog negation as classical negation. That's the reason why we cannot interpret negation as failure by classical negation. Well, of course, if we interpret this definition here as a definition, then it is entailed by the definition together with the axiom of the universe that 0 is not a member of 1, 2, 3. And so we really can interpret negation as failure, as classical negation. I think it's really as simple as that. So definitions also explain the strengths and weaknesses of logic programming for knowledge representation. So what's the contribution of logic programming for knowledge representation if we compare it to classical logic? Well, one of the big problems of classical logic for knowledge representation is that it does not offer inductive definability. But that's the strong point of logic programming. So that's the contribution here. What would be the weakness of logic programming for knowledge representation? Well, the problem of logic programming is that a programmer really has to provide definitions for all predicates. And that's okay for a programmer, but in knowledge representation, it's really unfeasible. In a knowledge representation setting, it simply happens all the time that the user doesn't know the definition of a certain concept. So that's the weakness of logic programming from a knowledge representation point of view, from this view here. So what it suggests here is that it is useful and valuable to try to integrate the benefits of both classical logic with logic programming. And that is what we have done in the past. We've built this FL.dot language, which includes first-order logic, which integrates it with definitions, inspired by logic programming and many other language constructs. And this, from a declarative point of view, this logic gives a declarative explanation of not only logic programming, but also data log, also abductive logic programming, parts of answer set programming. And it's also an expressive knowledge representation language in its own right. That's the language for which we are building this knowledge-based system. And that brings me to the second topic of this talk, which is the knowledge-based paradigm. I don't have time anymore to illustrate it, so, or at least to explain it. So sorry?
2 minutes.
Okay, so I'll just give an example. It's a very famous example, certainly in answer set programming, is the Hamiltonian cycle domain. The axiom I'm going to present, it's a small theory, it expresses that a successor function is a cyclic path through a graph G. And that visits all the nodes in G. So a cyclic path is represented by a successor function, and it should be visiting all nodes and be cyclic. Okay, so here is our theory. So here you have the graph G. I hope you can see that. Here is our successor function. What do we have to express? First of all, that S is following G. That is this first order axiom. And secondly, that for one particular node, G, I've taken A here, that it can reach all other nodes, including itself. And that will guarantee that the path visits all nodes and is cyclic. But then we also need an inductive definition of what nodes can be reached by A in the successor function. This, by the way, is a theory that cannot be expressed in first-order logic because of compactness theorem. But here it is. Okay, so that's the kind of theories we can build in this logic. Now, we can do reasoning with this, but we are trying to build a system that can perform different forms of inference to solve different types of problems. And one situation where we frequently find so many different inference problems is when we try to support a user to interactively configure a solution. Here we would configure both the graph and its cyclic
Sorry,
path.
your time is up, Mark.
Okay, right.
There will be a panel discussion now.
All right. So you see that the system here, to do what it does, what I've shown you, it needs to perform a number of inferences. I'm going back. We have built applications. We have to extend our system to include new arithmetic. That forced us to go to Z3. And that is my conclusion. So a proposed logic program has a logic of definitions. In my opinion, there is a glaring match with logic programming and definitions, and it explains many aspects and many of the lingering problems of logic programming, and I'm really surprised
by
the fact that it doesn't land. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. That's very neat.